Hey Vancouver, this is not a bike lane. This is also not a bike lane. This is a bike lane, but it's got a few problems. In March of 2023, Vancouver City Council decided to axe the plan to install bike lanes on blocks affected by subway constructions between Main and Arbutus along the Broadway corridor. One of the reasons for the cancellation cited by many was because there is already a bike lane on 10th Avenue. Even the mayor himself said this. However, 10th and also 8/7/6/5 are not bike lanes. A bike lane is defined as a portion of the roadway that has been designed by striping, signage, and pavement markings for the preferential or exclusive use of cyclists. While some portions may fit that description, as a whole, this bikeway doesn't fit that description. This is not a bike lane. My name is Nick, and I talk about small things that move people. Subscribe for regular content. And the area I'm talking about here is Broadway, aka 9th, and the streets that straddle it, which are 10th Avenue to the south and 8/7/6/5 to the north, all between Vine and Woodland. And why don't they fit the definition of a bike lane? Well, there may be signage and pavement markings. However, for much of the way, there is no striping defining a portion of the roadway that is for the preferential or exclusive use of cyclists. Now, there are lanes on a few stretches of 10th between Vine and Woodland. However, it only accounts for about 30% of the bikeway in that area, and even less if you go further to the east or west. And for the northern stretch, there is really only one block. It's a full bike lane between Cambie and Yukon. There's a spot near Arbutus, but it only spans a third of the block. It's more of a elongated modal filter than a bike lane. So for the most part, these are shared roads. It's a bikeway with sharrows, like this one. And while it may have traffic calming measures in place, such as modal filters, to help reduce car traffic, the way the cycling infrastructure changes as you go leads to 10th just feeling like a disjointed hodgepodge. It's not a bike lane. So whatever, it's not a bike lane. I'm just being pedantic, tomato, tomato. These are still adequate bike routes, right? Well, for some people, yeah, I am one of those people. For the most part, I really like these bikeways, but I am not most people. There's something called level of traffic stress, which is divided into 4 categories. At the top, LTS4 is strong and fearless. This makes up less than 1% of the population, and these are the people you see riding their bikes down the Sea to Sky Highway or riding down the 6-lane strode that is Broadway. 3 is enthused and confident, about 10% of the population. This is me, comfortable in bicycle gutters and streets with moderate car traffic. But most people fit into 2, interested but concerned. This makes up about 60% of the population. This is where all the potential is. These are the people who are willing to ride on a range of safer options, but where they are overwhelmingly willing to ride is protected bike lanes that are buffered from traffic. Think the Pacific Drive bike lane. And last, there is 1, which are people who would only ride in separated greenways or bike lanes like Stanley Park or the Arbutus Greenway. Now, the bikeway straddling Broadway could be appropriate for most folks from LTS 4 to 2, about 50 to 70% of the population, but in its current form, I suspect it's only comfortable for people in 4, 3, and some of 2, which would be about 10 to 20% of the population. In the City of Vancouver's guidelines on all ages and abilities cycling routes, it outlines rules on types of cycling infrastructure. And these bikeways miss the point in many regards by their own rules. For example, Rule 4, consider the interplay between parking and roadway width. Many stretches of 10th are too narrow for comfortable passing, and the stretches with enough room contradict Rule 3, target motor vehicle traffic below 30 kilometers per hour, because wider roads lead to higher speeds. Rule 9, keep grades below 3% as much as possible. There are some hills along 10th that certainly break this threshold, but the most egregious is the stretch between Clark Drive and St. Catharines on 7th, with grades as high as 15%. Rule number 10, design intersections thoughtfully to reduce conflicts and increase visibility. Much of the bikeways are good at this, however, there should not be a single two-way stop along these routes. In my experience, this is where I have the most conflict when other road users, mainly drivers, run stop signs or misjudge the speed of cyclists. And while the pseudo roundabouts aren't perfect, they are certainly better than stop signs. And apart from the rules, one of the biggest issues is the parked cars. Especially on streets with no separation, parking attracts moving cars, but maybe an even worse problem is the risk of getting doored. And even where there are lanes, there's issues. One of the biggest stretches with bike lanes on 10th is actually quite unpopular. And that's because there is poor separation from the sidewalk, it's too narrow in some places, and there are something like between, 14 to 16 areas of conflict just between Oak and Ash. Oh, and it's in front of a hospital, which makes it less than an optimal throughway for any mode of transport. And obviously, the meandering nature of the north route is not ideal. So yeah, by my estimation, and even by the city's own guidelines, this is not AAA bike infrastructure. But with a little work, I think it could get there. However, in its current state, no, you can't convince me that streets with car traffic and parked cars on either side is infrastructure fit for all ages and abilities. In that AAA infrastructure, the neat thing about it is that it can benefit the entire community. Like I mentioned, protected lanes are more inviting to the hesitant crowd, increasing bike ridership. We can see that interested but concerned cyclists are much more likely to ride in protected lanes. People feel more comfortable and safe in these protected lanes, which leads to a wider range of folks using them. We've already seen this in our own city. Nearly 14 years ago, the bike lanes on Burrard Bridge opened in the face of much opposition and has become the busiest bike lane in North America with well over 1 million trips every year. And that success led to the expansion of routes in places like Hornby, Canby Bridge, and the 10th Avenue Bikeway. And it's not just a feeling that they are safer, they are safer. Protected bike lanes lead to fewer accidents in all modes. When protected bike lanes were introduced on Bloor Street in Toronto, collisions between cars and bikes fell by 71%. And in New York City, injuries typically drop by 40% to 50+%. And that increase in cyclists means less cars on the road, even if cycling makes up just a fraction of somebody's trips, which leads to decreased pollution, increase in safety, and it makes car traffic better. Good bike lanes help everyone, not just cyclists. And another way they help everyone is that they only cost a fraction of taxpayer money compared to the same distance of road because they take up significantly less space than cars, and bikes are much easier on road surfaces, which means they're not only cheaper to build in the first place, but also require less maintenance. And I think this is a good time to talk about my gas tax pays for your bike lane argument. Simply put, gas tax does not cover the cost of our roads. Patrick Johnson, mayor of New West, actually wrote a blog post on this matter several years ago, and by his calculations, an average driver spends just $50 a year on roads through gas taxes, nowhere near what's needed to cover the cost of roads. Even a report commissioned by CAA, who has a vested interest in a favorable spin here, what they found in the report was that drivers paid for 70% of roads when calculating all motorist fees and taxes. But the real kicker here is that's just highways. So even if what they said in the report was true, fact is local and arterial roads are paid for by municipal property taxes. Our dependence on cars is more expensive for everyone, not just drivers. And I can't stress this enough, drivers are being subsidized by those who don't drive. You're welcome. So yeah, protected bike lanes lead to more cycling and the use of other micro options in lieu of cars, which lead to a healthier and more prosperous community. But let's make our way back to the Broadway situation. Even if 10th Avenue Bikeway ticked all the boxes of being a local street bikeway as laid out in the city's guidelines, and even if there was a full separated cycle track, it still wouldn't be an excuse to not build a bike lane on Broadway. And there are a few key reasons for that, which I will get to, but first I need to go over a few details of the plans surrounding the future of Broadway. So, since the Broadway corridor was being torn up by the SkyTrain/subway extension, it gave the city an opportunity to redesign the corridor. The initial draft of the Broadway plan included a great street design, which would see widening of the sidewalk at the cost of 2 auto lanes to create more inviting space for pedestrians. Later, an amendment to include a bike lane was added in June of 2022, which was proposed by one city councilor, Christine Boyle. There were 2 options drafted up. One was to use space on the sidewalk to create a bike lane on both sides of the street, and another option would reduce auto lanes further in favor of bike lanes. Personally, I think the second option would be a step too far for now. Either way, we won't be seeing any bike lanes on Broadway because in March of 2023, City Council voted 6-3 to remove bike lanes from the plan, opting for the original Great Street design, citing increased budgetary costs from changing the nearly finished designs at this stage, which would take money from other active transport routes in the city. This leaves the bike lanes to possibly be introduced after the subway line is operational and traffic flow has been studied. And while I think the new 4-lane design is certainly better than the 6-lane Strode we had before, the fact that there wasn't a bike lane already in the plans seems a bit puzzling to me. Because the city declared a climate emergency back in 2019, saying we needed to change the way we move, noting that 40% of our pollution is from burning gasoline and diesel. Also, the Broadway plan predates the bike lane amendment and dedicates an entire section on transportation where they outline the current state of cycling in the area and the improvements that need to be made. And the first note says, create a network of safe and comfortable bike routes for people of all ages and abilities, and key recreational, commercial, and employment destinations are well connected. You'd think a bike lane would have been a priority. You can make all the maps in the world with bike lanes galore, but until you actually build it, they're just empty promises. So as it is, we will have to wait, and when it's finally built, it will likely cost the city more than if it had been done now. But anyway, in the addition to the benefits I laid out earlier, the reasons why the straddling bikeways aren't an excuse to have a protected bike lane on Broadway. First off, the bikeways are away from Broadway, obviously making it less convenient to visit businesses, workplaces, and homes along the corridor. You reduce the convenience, you reduce the modal share. And a big part of that inconvenience in some people's opinion are the steep hills from Broadway up to 10th and down to 7th, which makes a multi-stop trip along the corridor much more difficult. A lane along Broadway would make those shopping trips by cycling or other micro options more attractive. And the absence of lanes along the corridor leads to people riding on the sidewalk, especially with the rising popularity of micromobility devices for delivery drivers who need to access many businesses along Broadway. And about those businesses, adding bike lanes is better for business. People who decide to ditch the car can spend a fraction they were previously on transport. They may save that money, but some of it gets spent on stuff, further investing in the community, which is backed up by the studies that show cyclists spend more than their auto counterparts. One study in New York found that after the construction of new bike lanes, local businesses saw an increase in retail sales of up to 49% compared to 3% in the rest of the city. Now, it would be silly to assume that that boost is entirely from cyclists spending money. While it is certainly a part, that's not the whole story. It's about what a bike lane does to a street. And I think it's pretty simple. Removing parking or travel lanes helps make it a more inviting space, a place for people.
I've seen it mentioned many times. Who would want to ride a bike on Broadway anyways? It's noisy, it's polluted with car traffic. This ignores the points that I made previously, but at the same time, I say, yeah, you're right, it sucks. And that's the reason for the reduced lanes, to reduce demand and reduce traffic. We can't have a cleaner city without reducing car traffic. For now, I think this is a missed opportunity for the city to make a statement, an exclamation at the start of a 30-year Broadway plan that says we take micromobility seriously. Much like the ripple effects of the Burrard Bridge bike lanes, something here could not only be the start of a new era, but a safer, healthier, cheaper, and frankly, a more enjoyable way we get about our day. I'm not trying to say that cycling and micromobility is the end-all, be-all of urban transportation that needs to be priority number one. No, we still need public transit, we still need cars. Not everybody can take active transportation. What I'm saying is that active transportation routes should not be an afterthought, but a safe and widely available option to get around our city. And as the old adage goes, if you build it, they will bike. With that, my name is Nick. Thanks for watching.